What up, crew? Today we're going to go through the steps for the Laurel Burch stuffed sculpture. And there was the video before where I went through information on Laurel Burch, the artist, some of her work, and the steps. So it's going to be important that you go back to that video as well for the steps for my in-progress demo photos and other examples. But I'm going to just kind of go through quickly the steps here today. So, to remind you, Laurel Burch's favorite animals were cats, fish, and horses. So these basic shapes I made so that you could kind of see like a blank canvas for a fish, a blank canvas for a Laurel Burch styled horse, and a blank canvas for a Laurel Burch style cat. So those shapes are a blank canvas right now, and then you would kind of mimic those shapes and add patterns to them. You can make whatever animal you want. Those are just her three favorites, so if we're kind of working in her style and inspired by her, you might want to do those animals as well. But if you want to do your own creature or animal or species, you go for it. I'm going to show you the cat shape because that was her number one subject matter. So we want to fill the paper, and you're going to need two. So the first one, you can just kind of go for it. And you want to make sure that your shapes are large and fill most of the page, and you don't have a lot of nooks and crannies that you have to cut in between and around. So I would come down for the legs. I think of the two front legs as almost like little breadsticks. So you got two breadsticks. Then your back leg comes around. The foot comes forward to touch the front legs, and then you go all the way across horizontally to the edge of the paper, and then you can come up and back to the body. And then your tail could be off the back here, or it could come into the leg. I'll show you kind of both ways. If you want to go like into the leg like a spiral, your tail could be like that, or it could come off the back like this and curl around. But again, not too many nooks and crannies. You want to be able to cut out your shape pretty easily. Then you could add in the facial features if you want. So again, I'm going kind of fast. I want you to take your time. And you could have the mouth open or closed. Maybe I'll go open. And you could add all sorts of details to your animal, whichever you choose. And then once you have the shape, you would then break it up into other shapes so that you could add patterns. And you could also think of these patterns almost as Zentangles, and you could kind of do it in any way you want. You could have big shapes or lots of smaller shapes. It's really up to you. There's no right or wrong way to do it. You could just let your artistic intuition guide you, and you could think of different patterns. So you could do like a checkerboard pattern, and you could really think of all sorts of different patterns. You could do random like cow or leopard or cheetah spots. You could do regular polka dots with rhythm of different sizes and different colors. You could just do stripes. You could go in all sorts of different directions. You could also do almost like a landscape within a shape. So maybe you wanted this to look like a little aquarium here. I don't know why. That's what I just kind of thought of. Maybe there's like a little castle in the aquarium. And maybe some fish are floating around. Some seaweed and coral. So you could do little landscapes, you could do all sorts of different patterns, and then when you think about that, if you do it with pencil first, keep it light till you get it right, and then go over it with a permanent marker, and then like we're treating our Laurel Burch animal as almost like a coloring book. So you're going to use crayons to color things in, and if you want, you could think about using contrasting complementary colors, which are opposite. So for instance, if I have red in part of this checkerboard, what would the complementary contrasting color be with the red? Well, you could look at your color wheel and you could find, oh yeah, it's green. Whoopsies. So you can make contrast there with red and green. If I wanted yellow in the ears up here, how could I get contrast next to that yellow? Well, if yellow's the very tip top of the color wheel, the very tip bottom, violetta purple. So you could put complementary colors next to each other for some good contrast in areas. And I'll show you another set of complementary colors. What about if I use primary blue in the spots over here? What would be the opposite of blue? If you're thinking anaranjado orange, you are absolutely correct. So a little orange next to the blue. So I won't color this whole thing in, of course, that would take forever. So you want to fill the whole cat or animal of your choice with color, and I'll show you a finished one here. I got that whole side done. I have areas of contrast, I have areas of texture, I have areas of pattern, line, shape, you name it. Then you're going to want to cut out that shape, and again, not a lot of nooks and crannies, so cut, cut, cut. I'm going to cut pretty fast. I'm not even going to be super careful around the lines, just so you don't have to watch me cut for too long. When you do it, you're going to want to take your time and go right up to that black Sharpie line. And then you can recycle or use those scraps again. The next part, because you need a piece of paper the exact same size as your first one, this next part's very important. You're going to place your image that you cut out, whatever animal you chose, onto the next paper. You might want to use something to hold it down, unless you can press it really tightly to the paper, and you're going to trace around the outside edge. So hold it down with the hand that you don't write or draw with. So then you can trace around it with your writing and drawing hand. And again, I'm using Sharpie so it's easier for you to see, but you should use pencil, keep it light till you get it right, and have an eraser nearby. So I have traced it, it's the exact same shape, but this part's super important. Like I said in the other video, as soon as you trace it, before you cut it out, notice this is going to be the inside of your stuffed animal sculpture. So if it's the inside, are you going to want to put all your patterns and hard work and craftsmanship on this side? No. So that's the inside. That's where it's going to be not visible. So before you do that, you could put like some X's or squiggles or just write your name. That way you don't put patterns in this spot. All right? You won't put patterns till you cut this second piece out. And once you cut this second piece out, then you'll flip it over and then start adding patterns. So that's why it's super important that you trace it very carefully and cut it very carefully so that they are perfect twins and mirror images, identical twins. But just because they're identical twins in shape and size, you can do different patterns on the opposite side. So it wouldn't have to look the exact same over here. So once you flip it, you have a mirrored image. So you're going to want to use the mirrored image, the opposite side. And with that opposite side, you can then look at your original just to kind of get, okay, the front paws were here. The back leg came like this. And again, this is why you want to use pencil, so that Obviously, I'm just sketching it in so you get the idea of where those features were on the opposite side. So, there you go. Then you can do different patterns, different landscapes. You could even, for our in-person learners, we want the name somewhere on there, because if your name's not on one side, we won't know who it was, because your name was on the inside where it gets stuffed. So you might want to incorporate your name as one of your patterns. And again, you can do a whole wide range of variety. It doesn't have to be the same on both sides. And I'll prove it to you with the cat that I finished. This is one side, and then just like in the slideshow, you see the other side is completely different colors and patterns, but I still do focus on contrast, texture, and the elements and principles of design. All right. So we once you've finished coloring and outlining and making them look amazing on both sides, you will line them up, and then I tend to do about 2 to 4 staples around the outside edge. So if I do one over there, I might do one on this side too, just so it's not losing its shape and coming apart. So I put 3 to 4 staples in. Obviously, you can see the gaps in there. We are going to stuff it, but not quite yet. We got to start stitching it. So to stitch it, you're going to do a lot of hole punches. So this takes a lot of class periods to complete, because there's so many techniques and steps. So remember, take breaks and do just like one step at a time. If you have a hole punch, you'll then be able to go around the outside edge, and you could measure with a ruler if you want, but try to keep your hole punches about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch apart. You don't want them so close that they kind of rip and don't become separate holes anymore. They become one big hole. But you don't want them so far apart that your stitching leaves big gaps in your animal, and then some of the stuffing comes out. So keep it to about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch apart, and not so close to the edge of your animal that it creates like a half circle. So I'll show you an example. So that is a full circle. You can see all the way through. This would not be what you want to do. It's where you're so close to the edge that it becomes a half circle, and that is not what we want when we are stitching. So you want to keep it about 1 inch to a 1/2 inch apart in your hole punches. Yes, you're going to lose some of your color and pattern, but not very much at all. And you would just continue to go all the way around the outside edge. I'll kind of show you a demonstration that I had started like this. So you see I went all the way around the outside edge, and then you're going to be able to start stitching. So I'm going to show you 2 different styles. Once you're all the way around, you're going to want to get some string or yarn that you can stitch with, or thread, even if you have thread. The first one I'm going to show you is just like the traditional stitch. So the traditional stitch, you just kind of hop from one hole to the next, over, under, over, under, over, under. So I'm pulling it through like a snake, and I dive down to the hole and pull through, and then come up through the next one. So that is the traditional stitch. So it just kind of hops from one to the next. Up, down, up, down, up, down. So that's traditional. I'm going to show you the whip stitch, which I think is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but also helps hold your stuffing and animal together. And sometimes if the end of your string gets a little frayed, I fold it, and it kind of makes it easier to push through the hole. You could even wrap a little piece of clear tape around it too if you want. So the whip stitch, you go through the front or the top, around your back edge. So you go from the front, out the back, around to the other side, and push back through. So see how it's sort of hugging the edge of the paper? And you'll want to pull through a little. So I jump back to the front, push through, out the back, and it's hugging the outside edge. Uh-oh, I went through my loop. That's a common mistake. You don't want to go through your loop and tie knots too early. So, again, you could fold your string, go around back to the front, push through, hug the edge of your animal, go around to the front, push through, and it's hugging the edge of your paper. And you'd want to pull your string all the way through toward the end here. That way you don't run out of string. Because once it's pulled through, the whip stitch is so tight you can't keep pulling. So you would want to pull the beginning string all the way through almost to the very end before you start stitching, and then that way it'll stay put. So you'll want to whip stitch all the way around, whip, whip, whip. And then that will keep it together. Once you kind of figure out, okay, maybe I'm going to stuff through the very top of the head, you would start your whip stitch maybe at this ear, go all the way around, stop at this ear so that you have room to stuff the animal. So we'll pretend that I whip stitched all the way around and the only opening is up here at the top of the head. So I like to reduce, reuse, recycle, and use old newspaper that we don't use anymore as the stuffing. So I just like rip pages and I crinkle it up into wadded up pieces like that, and then you can stuff the animal. You can even use a ruler as a tool to push it down to the bottom and to all the corners, and you would just keep doing that over and over till you thought your animal was stuffed enough. And then once you felt, okay, that is stuffed enough, you would finish whipping from where you left off to the very beginning, and then you would tie your knot, almost like you were tying a shoe. You could tie it like that, or just tie the knot part so it would stay. All right, but again, try to use recycled newspaper. Don't use good drawing paper or paper you could collage with. Just use old newspaper. You could even go to the recycling center to get some newspaper if you don't have any at home. Old magazines work too, but I just had newspaper on hand. All right, one last thing. If you have your animal all stuffed, kind of like this example here, maybe you want a hanger for it so that you could hang it from a doorknob or a hook or anything, and then it could, or even hang from the ceiling, and it could be a mobile. A mobile is a hanging, moving sculpture, and we've turned our drawings into sculptures by getting both sides done, like that, stuffing it, and stitching it, and then hanging it. So it's a sculpture now that you can see from all sides. So a drawing or a painting is usually just flat. You only look at one side. A sculpture, you look at all sides. So we've turned a two-dimensional drawing into a three-dimensional sculpture. And then I use the whip stitch on that cat. I also use the whip stitch on this fish, so you can see it goes around and around and around. And I even tied a little hanger to it. And then for my horse I tried the traditional stitch, but the traditional stitch, it just doesn't hold together as well. You see way more gaps. The stuffing could fall out, and I couldn't stuff it nearly as full as I wanted to with the traditional stitch. So I try to encourage people to use the whip stitch. I think it's a good technique. Again, in the other slideshow video, I have examples and more in-process photos and demos as well. For your hanger, I'll just show you real quick. I have a separate string. You have to cut it to the length that you want it to be hung from. So you don't want it too short, but you also don't want it so long that if you hung it from the ceiling, it would hit the floor. That'd be crazy. So, for your hanger, if you want to hang it from the top, you would find a hole near the top of your animal. And you could, like this one, I have strung it through, like I picked 3 holes near the top. I strung it through the first and the third, leaving that second one there, because if you just string it through one, it might be a little unbalanced if it's not perfectly centered, but if you have it on 2 holes like this that are apart, it'll be able to hang a lot better and be stronger. So let's say I wanted this blue one in there. You would just poke it through. Well, that's going to be difficult. I'll show you on this one. So let's say I'm hanging it from the top here. I have my holes go all the way around. So I look at the top 3. I would push some string through the first hole, through that third one, leaving one in between. And then the knot that I like to tie, you just start with an X, go under the loop, make another X, and go through the loop. And just to be safe, one more time, make an X, go through the loop, 3rd time's the charm, and then your Laurel Burch animal will be able to hang from anything. So, I know this video's long. I know there are so many steps to the process. But again, this video will help you immensely, and so will the slideshow video where you learn about Laurel Burch, and every step of the way you can always pause, you can always rewind and go back, but please break lessons up into digestible chunks. So ways that you can work for a little bit and then come back to it to do the next step in the process. So I cannot wait to see how you turn your drawings into mirrored images and then sculptures. So keep up the good work. Can't wait to see what you come up with. Adios amigos.